So welcome everyone to what we're calling Design Lab. This is, I'll start out with the boiler for what this event is. It is a virtual workshop series to provide Gladstone's community with an ongoing training and support for a wide range of design and science illustration projects. I want to start out with a few housekeeping notes just to set the tone for it. We're obviously keeping this real casual. We're in the meeting format, as everyone is familiar with here at Gladstone, and not a seminar. So you can chime in and come off mic. Let's make sure that that setting is set. Enable. Yeah, you are allowed to come on mic. So you can bounce in whenever you want. If you have a question that is pertinent to the demo that is about to begin. But I would say that we have also enabled Q&A. So if you do have a question, go ahead and pop that in the Q&A. Chat is also great and also available, but I am definitely not good at multitasking, and people who have the skill to be able to monitor the chat while they're also doing other things is a skill way beyond ours. So especially as we're finding our feet with this, yeah, we're gonna keep it in this format. So questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the back end, so we will be able to reach all those. But also stay tuned for more information on how you can give general comments to us. We are going to be doing this monthly for the foreseeable future. So questions and comments that come in between shows, we will be sending out some notification about where that's going to be. I think right now we're thinking about put that in Slack and setting up a Slack channel for that. We'll also can post some resources there that we're going to be talking about, and also expect that this is being recorded, and we will be posting the recording of this on Hello for you guys to review afterwards. So with that, Tammy, this is Tammy Tolpa. I'm Giovanni Mackey. I think we need a little proper introduction to kick off this series. So Tammy, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing here.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining our first design lab today. My name is Tammy Tolpa. I live in Seattle. I'm one of those remote employees. I have been at Gladstone for a year. I have an MFA in medical illustration. Definitely hit me up if you have any questions about that. After getting my MFA, I moved to San Francisco. I worked for a bunch of kind of medical e-learning startups, one design agency. Then I had a freelance business. I launched an online course to teach scientists to make their own figures and visuals. And then about a year ago, I joined the team at Gladstone, and I'm part of the communications team. So I do sort of a combination of creating visuals for communication projects, and then also working directly with you all, investigators and labs and postdocs, formatting and creating your figures for publications and talks and lab websites and presentations and kind of whatever y'all need. And then Design Lab is a big part of my position as well. So I'm really super excited to be launching this initiative, and really glad that you all showed up.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. In fact, I'm so excited when we got the chance to hire you last year. By the way, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Yes, it's been a year. I can't believe it. But we've been talking about this for a long time. And I was really stoked when you came on to be able to basically take over a role that I shared as a part of my many roles that I kind of have as a science illustrator. But I too come from a science illustration education. I went through the certificate program for science communication at UCSC, very different school. Yeah, I went through that, came out of it, and I too also moved up to San Francisco and kicked off my freelance career, where I worked for places like the Public Library of Science and also the California Academy of Sciences before I landed here a whopping 12 years ago at Gladstone Institutes. And it was what a wonderful opportunity it was, and it's been. My name, by the way, is Giovanni Mackey. I am the creative director here at Gladstone Institutes now, which appropriately suits the title appropriately suits my role, which is really looking over most everything visually and most of the creative that's happening here that I basically oversee and have a hand in. So again, so stoked to have another Science Illustrator here to sort of relieve that and dedicate that for you all. And also to be able to have an opportunity. I think we talked about this a lot, about having some discourse and actually between the two of us and be able to work. It's not very often that two Science Illustrators get to work in the same organization. So it's really great that we can kind of do that. And so that's, I also wanted to, this is a little bit different than the rest of our design labs. I think that we've kind of plotted out where we have sort of a two-part show kind of planned each time. So this one's going to be a little bit different, but I think we'll still have time for some Q&A, but I think we also anticipate that there's probably going to be less questions this time. I feel like we're going to really ramp up on the questions and the real participation from you all as we go on. But yeah, we've been talking about this for some time. I've been thinking about this for a long time, right, Tammy? There's I think that like I said, with the boiler of this is that we talk about this as a training and support series, but that kind of sounds like we have a curriculum laid out and that we have it all kind of together, but it's not exactly the case. It's much more, it's a little bit more like I don't know, a little more flexible in that. I think we're ready to really respond to what everybody is going on, and I think it's kind of built that way. What we have committed to is that we're going to show up every month, and that we're going to do a demo and process, a technique or a tool that we think that you guys will all find useful. And what we cover is largely going to be influenced by you, though. So, like I said, it's going to evolve over time, and it's really going to be watching and listening to what all questions you all have, and what you're going to share with us, and we're going to respond to those directly. And this is the opportunity for that. That is the top half of the show. The bottom half of the show is Q&A, maybe more of an AMA we've been talking about. Maybe it's just a phone a friend. The idea is that it's really your chance to come on and sort of like an office hours of sorts, where you can come in and ask those questions you've always been wanting to ask. You get to ask directly a professional and get some direct advice on some, questions might be, how do I even work with Gladstone's Science Illustrator? Maybe it's just, why won't Illustrator let me select a particular object? It cannot figure this out. It's there. I can't select it. Help. I need help. My Google searches yield nothing. Maybe it's, why do you make those weird style choices? Why are your arrows so thin? And we can talk about those sort of like, stylistic choices that we're making, and what we're hoping to achieve by all that.
And just to clarify, that sort of AMA portion of all of the maybe subsequent sessions, it doesn't have to be about the demo or the topic that we're doing that week, right? It can sort of be anything. Completely
decoupled. Yeah, could be. Yeah, it's really anything. Yeah. Cool. The quick note about demo, it might go kind of quick, but don't worry about writing anything down or, this, like we said, this will be recorded. You can always follow up with watching it again if you need to. It's really just sort of a sit back and watch and kind of be entertained. I think that the intent is not to catch 100% of it, and nor is it intended to really apply to everyone 100%. It's really just to our expectations is everyone's going to be able to get something out of them, but not necessarily follow it step by step or be able to understand everything. So yeah, I think this is a little bit of an experiment, as I've mentioned, but this, this sort of demo session is, Tammy and I are quite familiar with these sort of things. They're really common in the design world, and that's something that we definitely wanted to bring over to Gladstone. So that way we could kind of share this very convenient and dynamic way of interacting and learning. So without any further ado, Tammy, I think we can start on our demo. What do you think?
Cool. Yep. Sounds good. So I am going to do a demo using a real life figure that I got at Gladstone. I'm going to sort of walk you through the decisions that I would make or did make to sort of optimize this figure for publication and to really let the data shine through. Along the way, we'll cover things like grouping in Illustrator and different ways of selecting, how to change some fonts. We'll talk about some principles of visual hierarchy a little bit, how to scale things, how to correct maybe some mistakes that you'll make, maybe some tools and tricks in Illustrator a lot more. We'll also see how Giovanni might have done things a little bit differently because design is all about making choices and they're not always one single way you could do it. So that's kind of the format, how this will go. So without further ado, I will kind of show you what I've got here and we'll get started. All right. Is that looking good, Giovanni?
It is, yeah.
You can see all my menus. Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we indicated, if you've got some questions while I'm going on that they, and they make sense for us to answer live, then definitely pop those in there. So I'm in Adobe Illustrator here. I'm not exactly sure how familiar you all are with Illustrator. I know it is something that you all have access to at Gladstone, and it is the software that we use. It's not the only software. So the principles are going to apply no matter what you use. And so that is one nice thing about these sessions, that we're going to go over some principles that are broadly applicable no matter what. The demo will be in Illustrator, or some of our demos will be in PowerPoint. So we'll be demoing in specific software, but those principles are accessible to you no matter what you're using. So given that, here we are in Illustrator. I've got this figure. I'm going to sort of keep two versions so that we have a before and after. We'll look at the before when we're finished. So I'm just going to kind of zoom in here to the one I'm going to work on so that we'll do the big reveal at the end. The first thing I am going to do, so this is something that was created in Prism, brought into Illustrator. And, often you might export a PDF. I don't know if some applications will let you go right into Illustrator, but Illustrator is where we're going to sort of optimize, not only for clarity, but for publication. So the first thing I'm going to look up here is I'm going to check my color space. And so I see that this file is CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black. That is really appropriate for legit like 4-color offset printing. We're going to switch that to RGB, red, green, blue. That is more appropriate for something like a graphic that is for PowerPoint or a website. Digital presentation. However, most journals, at least in my experience, are also asking for RGB images, even though those are printed. So step one is we're going to go into RGB. So we're going to do, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that I think that's a great practice in general, because working in CMYK, it's a much more limited color space. So you don't get as wide a range of colors. And I think that, you and Tammy and I kind of often talk about the flexibility, or setting things up for a wide range of options. And, print RGB's color space is much wider. CMYK's is smaller and sort of fits within that more or less. So if you plan to use this for a PowerPoint, you can get those robust colors if you keep it in RGB, and you don't have to commit to a smaller, duller color set necessarily, right? So you get that flexibility baked in if you just are working in RGB.
Yeah, and I always learned you convert to CMYK at the end, right? If you are going to send something to a printer. And RGB, works with light. CMYK is technically pigments. So
Tammy, your mic is falling off a tiny bit. I don't know if you can get a little bit.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So we're going to go to edit. Where was that? Oh, no. File, document color mode, RGB. Now, I don't see a whole lot of difference in my image. That's fine. I just confirm up here that I did switch to RGB. So that's going to be step one. Now I'm going to sort of look at my figure here, and I'm noticing here that it's all grouped. So I don't know if it came in that way, but nonetheless, we can talk a little bit about grouping here. So when I click on this, everything is selected. I see kind of blue artifacts of the group and of the selection. So there's a couple ways we can work with this. We could always do object ungroup, and then I can pick different elements here. I'm just going to do Control Z to undo the ungrouping. If I go up to some of my selection tools here, I could select the group selection tool, and then without ungrouping, I can still select different elements inside here. So that's a couple different ways you could treat that, depending on if you wanted to keep your objects in a group. Sometimes it's nice to have that because then things don't go awry. Another thing you could do is you could double click, and then you'll notice up in here, I have a little, I don't know if this breadcrumb trail or something that just tells me I'm inside of a group. And then without ungrouping, I can still kind of move my objects around. And then I can click to go back out. So those are 3 different ways I can manage objects that are grouped. I tend to like to keep things in a group and then use the group selection tool to kind of select individual elements without ungrouping. So that's sort of my preference. Another thing I will like to do, this is very common when things come in from data visualization software especially, is that they will have clipping paths. And they tend to get really messy. Sometimes you need them, sometimes you don't. It really depends on the image. I know there's a clipping path here because I'm going to try to select this black line here, and I'm just getting something that has, if I look over here, no fill and no stroke. So I know that's a clipping path. A clipping path is just an invisible box that contains something that was placed inside of it. And I will see it often like with heat maps or some pixel-based images that are put inside of figures. I don't actually have any pixel-based images here, so I'm not exactly sure how this clipping path got in there. So, but I don't want them. So what I will do is I've decided I have one of these like little mystery goblin clipping paths. So I see no fill, no stroke. That tells me clipping path. I go to object, oh no, sorry. So select same, let's see, fill and stroke. Now that's going to select everything that has no fill, no stroke. I've already figured out that those are my clipping paths. I'm going to do something a little risky, and I'm just going to delete them and see what happens. See if I lose anything I needed. So I deleted those. Nothing disappeared. All right, cool. I'm feeling good about that. Those clipping paths were going to be in my way. They weren't doing me any favors. I just got rid of them.
Yeah, they're definitely an artifact, right? Like this is a standby that I think a lot of mostly PDFs have, but it's a way that basically Adobe has homogenized a lot of the effects and of the styling, so that way it's universally read. So they're definitely like an artifact that they serve no purpose and especially get in the way, right?
Yep.
Get rid of them.
And then when I look at a figure like this, the first thing I notice is I feel like my lines are way too thick, right? They're really distracting from the data. I want the data to be.
They're not the most important thing.
Right.
That seems like it's probably the most important thing. Those lines in between.
They are the background singers. The data is like the Diana Ross, or a better modern equivalent of that. Although
You're showing your age. You're showing your age.
Right. So that was the first thing I thought when I saw this. I thought, I have to, maybe do I get rid of these lines? Do I just like dial them down, right? So if they're my background singers, I decided I'm going to dial them down. I want to keep them and send them to the background so that the data really shines through. So there's a couple ways I can do that. I want to do that to sort of all of these grid and axes lines, these tick marks, and this little bracket up here. So in correcting this, I'm going to show you a couple different ways to select multiple elements in your figure, and you'll find this useful in all sorts of ways. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this line here. Again, this whole thing is grouped, but I'm using my group selection tool so that I can select something inside my group. And I look up here and I see this is 4 points. So I don't know, that might be appropriate in some contexts. I'm going to dial it down to maybe like 1 point. That I might decide to make my lines thicker later, but at this point, I'm just going to knock them all back so I can really see the data that I'm looking at. So the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to select that line. I'm going to go up here to select same, let's see, stroke, weight. So now that has selected all those lines that were 4.154. I'm going to turn that into 1. All right, so already I feel like I can see the data much better. I still have these axes, these little brackets, these tick marks, the brackets up here. They weren't selected because they must be a different line weight. Oh, those are 28825. So I could repeat that same thing. I could do select, same stroke weight. I could knock those down to 1. All right. So now everything is receded to the background. I think I'm going to get rid of this line entirely. I don't think I need that. But I kind of want my axes to step forward on our stage a little bit. I don't know if you would agree, Giovanni, but I feel like I want these verticals to really be the furthest. And then I want that grid line to come up a little bit more, but then I still want my data to kind of shine.
For sure. There can be some nuance there. I think you don't, they all do, if they're all the same weight, then they sort of already the same, but you can start playing with that and you can start giving people sort of I don't know, a hierarchy of what to review and priorities on things.
Yeah. It's like when all your text is bold, nothing's bold, right? So exactly. The same applies here.
Yeah.
So what I would probably do, so I could select and then shift and keep selecting all of these lines that I want to make it bigger. My quick and dirty go-to is I take this this group selecting tool and I just kind of draw a box around all these things. That's a way I could do it. And then let's just make those 1.5 for right now. There's a third way you could select. You could go over here to the lasso and you could select, if I wanted those 3 lines, I could do that as well. So those are kind of 3 different ways you can select objects in your figure, right? Shift and click, quick and dirty box, or lasso to sort of, break in the horses or whatever. So, okay, I like this a lot, right? I've got slightly thicker lines. I've got some thin lines. I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm not done, but already I feel like this is a big improvement. I feel like I can, the weight of those big heavy lines has been diminished. Anything else to add, Giovanni, before I go on?
No, so far so good. Definite improvement so far.
Yeah, for sure. And these are easy things, that anyone can implement. Once you can see these things, you'll find opportunities to make these kind of improvements all the time. Let's see. Okay, so when I look down here, we've got some of these mu values that are bracketed down here or boxed in. I don't think I need those, right? That's extra ink or light or whatever. It's an extra pigment that I don't need in my figure. So I would get rid of those right away. And then I notice that this is a different font. So if I look up here, this is the symbol font. I could also see that over here in the character palette. And then the other fonts here are Helvetica. So Helvetica is kind of the one we use with Gladstone of this sort of standard fonts. And then often in figures, we'll do Helvetica or Arial. Usually all of the journals specify one or either of those, right? I don't know, Giovanni, have you ever encountered one that wasn't one of those 2?
Yeah, I would not respect that journal, or probably a very low impact factor if they, I don't know, put in anything else. But yeah, they're basically the milquetoast of fonts, and I'd probably say that like it's a endearingly say that to Helvetica because it is it's
your favorite.
It's so ubiquitous, and I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's definitely like the one that it set the gold standard for clarity, and it's sort of like in the background, it's the unseen element. It's just so well designed. And Arial, and this is a topic for another one, but it's basically a bastardized version. It was a way of Microsoft getting around copyright issues with it. So they made their own. They called it Arial, and it's just inferior. But
wow, I didn't know that backstory.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, nobody's going to ask you to do Comic Sans in your journal figures, so don't even bother. But yeah,
do Arial not submit. Just retract your submission.
And in fact, a recent journal that I was looking through their specs, they were very specific, no other fonts at all. So I'm a little concerned that the symbol, even though I think that is one that's available across platforms, I'm a little concerned that this is a symbol font. So I know that these Greek letters are available in Helvetica or Arial. So I'm going to change that. Oh, I see one thing in the Q&A.
Yeah, I was going to say it's actually a pretty good question. And we were talking about layers actually just before we went on. And
should I read that question?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think, is it Yulia asked, do you suggest working in layers for figures like these? Totally, except as you can see, I'm not right now. So yeah, totally I would. Giovanni, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, like we talked about, it's like you could sort of talk about organization about that, and that could eat up another half an hour. But I think the short answer is that, as far as I'm concerned, the priority of I very rarely use layers in Illustrator. Layers in Photoshop are a totally different story, and that you can have, they're much more dynamic, and they're much more important to how they're much more important to manage, this suffice to say. But in Illustrator, I think it's just sort of the hierarchy of what is on top of the other. And what I tend to do is I tend to do so much regrouping, so much reorganizing that it ends up shuffling all. And if they are in separate layers, if you regroup something, then they can't be in separate layers. They have to join the same layer. So using, strictly speaking, in terminology of Illustrator, creating separate layers kind of creates separate hard groupings. In fact, like Illustrator, if you twirl down that layers palette to see all the objects that fall into that, all of those are basically individual objects that are sitting within a layer. So the question is, I don't know if this is really going to answer your question, but the answer to your question is layers necessary? It is good, but it's almost the last cleanup that you might do, where you organize all of your objects and you might want to put it into, text on one layer, maybe data on one layer, maybe all of your axes on another layer. But generally, as you're sort of cleaning this up, I go through a process of grouping and regrouping things. And so a lot of that gets mucked up anyway. So that's my stance. How about you, Tammy?
Well, now that you say that, yeah, I do mess up my layers a lot with grouping and regrouping. I will often put text on a separate layer just because sometimes you export a figure without text. Like sometimes there is a use for that. So it's easy to toggle off if you have on a separate layer. Often I will kind of do that at the end if I'm just trying to clean up something, or if I'm handing it off to someone and I want them to have maximal flexibility.
Or an understanding how something's built, right? Like you need to have, it's a basic form of annotation. So that's also helpful.
Or if there's any kind of background element and you also might want to export it with transparent background or just a solid white background, sometimes that's handy to have on another layer too. Yeah, that's a good question. And I do think that our next session will be more about pulling multiple figures together into panels. And so we'll get a little bit more into some of those kind of Illustrator tools, I believe, in that section, or that session, excuse me. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so where were we? I think I was trying to get rid of this symbol. Okay, so a couple ways you can do this. Again, there's always multiple ways to approach something, especially in Illustrator. So I'll just show you a couple of them. I'm going to shift click to select both of these. Now my Illustrator setup my workspace might look a little different than yours does, but in mine, I can change the fonts up here. So I could go here and I could pull this down to the font I want it to be. Like that would be awesome. I happen to have Helvetica floated kind of to the top because I use it a lot. So I could do that. And then you'll see that it still has that Greek letter, but now all the fonts are the same, or they're all Helvetica. The other thing I could do with those two selected is I could go over to the character palette. I could do it here. Same thing. I would just pull this down, Helvetica's top, because I use it a lot. A third thing I could do is over here in the tools palette, I could take the eyedropper and I could just I could select another font, another piece of text that has a font I want. So see that as I hover over this, I get that little T that tells me I'm grabbing the text attribute from this. So I could do that if I wanted bold. I could do this if I wanted those, which are not bolded yet. They may be bolded later. So those are kind of 3 ways that you could grab and change the text really quickly on the fly. But I do think it's important that I change that out of that symbol font, just in case the journal I'm submitting to said no fonts except for Arial or Helvetica. And it also makes the whole thing a lot more consistent. All right. So we're at a point now where it's looking pretty good, right? We could ostensibly submit this. We have our legend over here. You know, I might want to make my fonts all, you know, the same size. So they're all Helvetica. But this is for a weird size, 14.287. This one's 11 point something. This is 10. These are 10 something. So it probably would make sense for them to be all the same size, or we could decide maybe axes labels are larger than the legend. It does make sense for our title to be the largest, but we've got weird sizes right now. And then we can talk about, do we want to create a little bit of hierarchy with our font sizes? So for right now, I'm just going to select all of these and I'm just shift clicking to select them. And I'm going to change them to, oh, so our numbers disappeared because they're all different numbers now. Let's just say we want them all to be 12. Maybe I'm okay with these being bold and that being bold. That sort of makes sense. You know, maybe these could even be bold. But then should these be bold? I don't know. What do you think, Giovanni?
Yeah, I think that my thought on this has kind of shifted over the years, but I do think that, you know, essentially, and I already know where you're going with this. So but I will say that, like, as far as the hierarchy, and the answer to your question is always a yes, whenever you can add some hierarchy using typography. But if I think about where this is going to sit on the on a hierarchy of information on the page, then I definitely think that, you know, it's on the level with the other labeling that you have on the bottom of the x-axis. So it's, yeah, I kind of see those as, you know, those should sort of match.
So should we peek at our before, or should I keep going? What do you think?
No, keep going. Okay. That has a little foreshadowing.
So this is pretty good, right? There's a couple more things I could do, but I actually think this is pretty solid and pretty decent. A couple more things we'll do are related to this legend. But before we get to that, I might want to I'm going to select these sort of verticals that are not my axes. And I want to think about, is there a way I can kind of push them back even more? And the 2 things that come to mind for me is, one, I could kind of make them gray. Oh, let me show you this. So we see these blue dots and lines, artifacts of the fact that we have that selected. If I do Command H, I can hide those lines. They're still selected. They're still going to change, but I can see the change happening without those sort of lines getting in my way. So I could make those gray, and they're still there. They're still serving a function, but I've kind of knocked them back. I could also, over here in the stroke palette, I could decide to make a dotted line, and you play around with kind of the dot and dash, or the dash and the gap over here. So dotted lines sometimes attract more attention, so you have to sort of be careful about the decisions you make here. I think a gray dotted line is probably going to attract less attention, but I think if you had a fat dotted line, like, for sure, that's not your background singer. Like, they are coming forward. So you can play around with what works for you. Another quick thing, I'll zoom in and show you how to make, this is technically a dashed line. If we wanted dots, it's counterintuitive for me, but if you do 0 for your dash, and then, you know, 1 or 2 or whatever for your gap, that's how you'll get an actual dotted line instead of a dashed line. And also, sometimes dotted lines can get a little noisy, depending on if they're printed or even on a screen. So that's kind of a place to be a little bit careful. But I'm kind of happy with that. I feel like they're in there. They're still serving a structure and a function, but they're not distracting. They're clearly not axes, you know. So I'm pretty happy with how that looks. As long as I'm here, I might just kind of I'm going to select, oh, so this arrow with that's white without the plus lets you select like points. Oh no. All right. Do you see that? So
You found it. You found it. And you got the
so
whammy.
that happens a lot. If you bring things in, well, that's not what I wanted to do. If you bring things in from PDFs or other software, you will sometimes get these duplicates. And I don't know why, Giovanni. Do you know why?
No, I mean, it goes back. Who knows? I mean, only the programmers know exactly why, or But I think it goes back to that same artifact that's happening for the clipping mask, right? It's dealing with an object as best as it can in a universal way, and as a result, it just maybe makes multiple instances of it.
Yeah, we don't
But
need
yeah,
those.
they don't help. Oh yeah,
and
that can be infuriating.
Yes,
Yeah.
they'll drive you crazy because you will
Yes.
think you have changed the color or the stroke weight, and it doesn't change, and it's because you've changed the one behind the one on top, and it's really frustrating. So, all right, well then I guess I'm glad we found that one.
Yeah, and I'll do like a quick plug. I think you're going to move that whole line down, which but the I'm going to do a quick plug for something that we're definitely going to cover. But there are plugins to help you with actually cleaning up some of these too. So I think there are some tools available that aren't necessarily native to Illustrator, but you can buy these plugins and add them to them, and it makes a world of difference. And the amount of time that it has saved me processing figures for folks has been so worth whatever amount that it costs. And I don't know if you can buy them a la carte, but more on that later. We're definitely going to have that as a subject to cover, but plugins, useful plugins for processing these.
Yeah, and I hadn't used those before working at Gladstone, so I was really happy to learn about those. So real quickly, I'm gonna use this. What is this one called? Direct selection tool. This lets me select points instead of the whole object. So I'm gonna. Oh, I still have Command H where I was hiding. Okay. So I select both of those. I just want to scoot that down. We don't need all that space. I'm going to pull that down. Okay, so the one other thing I might want to do to this, I think this looks good, but I am always a fan of direct labeling. And when I can eliminate a legend, I will always try to do so. So direct labeling would mean labeling directly on your plot. And often you can do it really easily at the end of a line graph. Sometimes you can do it underneath bars. It really depends on the space you have available to you. And so, depending on what we were using this for, if we had a lot of width, we could do this. I'm just going to do it because I think it eliminates your reader or your viewer from having to look in two places and compare. It's just much better. There's less cognitive load when we direct label. So I'm going to see if I can get these labels to fit down below each of these. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So to do that, I'm going to need to make my whole thing much bigger. So first, what I'm going to do, I still have this whole entire thing grouped. I'm just going to cut this out of it so I can just like move it out of the way, right? So this is actually, I made it its own group now. Here's this group. I'm just going to hold down Shift and grab one of these corners and just scale. Shift allows me to scale proportionally. So I'm going to get this sort of as big as I can. And then this is my cringe moment for Giovanni. Oops, I'm going to get a little smaller because I don't want to reveal the before. I'm going to just make this wider. No designer in their right mind is probably going to ever advocate that you do something this sloppy, but I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to show you how to fix what you've just done and make it look really good. So I keep not wanting to show our before. Okay, so I've stretched this out. I can see now that I probably can just about fit my labels down there, especially if I put a little return, right? And I make it 2 lines. And then I make my paragraph spacing to center. So, but I've done a couple of things that are super bad. I've got stretched out text, and my circle is now an oval and my square is now a rectangle. And that might be okay, but we can fix that. So I'm going to select this text. I'm just shift selecting to get all of this. And then if I go over into this character palette, I can see I've increased those by almost 40%. So if I just do 100 in there, I have my normal text again. It looks better already. Then I'm going to sort of take these labels and pop those down here. I've decided I don't even know if I need these tick marks. So I'm just going to get rid of all of these. I'm going to kind of move these brackets down a little bit, and then I'm going to slowly bring all of these over here. So I'm just hitting a return to make these two lines. I'm going to center justify them, and then bring them down. And this is the part where if it were a cooking show, we would have the cake already baked. And also, this is where I would be super careful to make sure, I've double checked. The gray circle was this one, and this now the red one is this one. So I'm just going to go through, hit returns, center justify, and then pop them down there. And I've basically eliminated any need for a legend. But there's still a couple of things I need to fix. All right. Well, whoops. All of those are down there. I don't need my little symbols in my legend. I'm going to get rid of those. Need a little more room. I'm going to move these down. Oh, I've got more duplicates. I'm just going to delete those. And then I'm going to mess these up a little bit more because I actually did kind of a good job lining them up. I'm going to select all these labels. And I'm going to go over here to my align panel. And I'm going to click this one. It's just going to bump them all to the same sort of horizontal line. No. Oops, I had it set to align to page instead of selection. Nope, I still had that.
Yeah, that's sticky. And that can be also infuriating sometimes.
Oh, I think it happens when you're inside of a group. Does that sound right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So we'll remember back, in the 20 minutes ago, we talked about double clicking to go inside the group. I'm going to select these. Oh, there it goes. It worked. And then so I can align things, and I can align them, on the top, in the middle, on the bottom, if you look over here. And then I can also spread them horizontally. And so the technique I like to do is, let me see these up a little bit, is I get this one where I want and this one, and then I'm going to have all the rest be distributed evenly across that whole span. Oh no, what was that? Oh, I missed one. Okay. So now those look evenly distributed. They're underneath each of their data points, and they're all aligned at the top. I'm still inside this group, so I'm just going to get out of there. And then I can, whoops, I'm going to pull these up. Maybe I'll move this whole thing up a little bit. So pull these up. That looks pretty good to me. The one thing that's left is my data points are all stretched out and ugly. So I'm gonna, oh, was there a question?
No, it's no good. You don't want stretched out. They look stretched out.
Yeah. So I only found out about this tool recently. I'm sad to say I was like years old when I figured this out. I'm gonna adjust all of these independently so that they will scale just relative to themselves. And first, I'm just gonna select all of my axes and just hide them so that they're out of my way. So if you recall, you're able to select something and go to select same. This time I don't want stroke weight. I want stroke color so I can get all of the black stuff. I get my axes, I get my tick marks, I get these error bars, I get the brackets. I want all of that. And then I want to do the object, hide, selection. So those are still there. They're just sort of hidden, and I'll show them later. You could put them on a different layer and you could hide that layer, but that's like 2 steps. So I just hide them. Then I can go in. Actually, let me hide these. Whoops. Let me hide these lines too. Object, hide, selection. And then I'm going to select all of these. I'm just going to do my quick and dirty box. And then this is the coolest part. I'm going to go to object, transform each. And then in this palette, there's so many things I could do. All I really want to do is get them back to being square. Let me go back out. Let me do that Command H to hide. Let me go back to object, transform each. And then I just want to scale them horizontally in the, negative direction until they look right. So I'm just going to kind of drag this. I don't know if you can see, well, here, now you can definitely see the change, right? So I'm just going to kind of drag these until they're back where they were before. I'm going to kind of look at that circle. That's the easiest one for me to tell. Has it gone from being an oval back to circle? It looks pretty good to me. What do you think, Giovanni? Is that?
Yeah, it does look it. You got to eyeball it sort of. I mean, you could actually get into the math. And I know that there are some folks that probably would get into the math. And I've done that before, but it's you can get it close enough for government work. And the thing that's really nice about this transform each is that you can decide on where that center point of the object that it's shrinking from, and you make sure you see it down here. That it's already set in the center, which means that, the data point is, you're just altering it from that center point. You want to make sure that that is set in the center. Otherwise, you're gonna shift your data around. And
you can see here that you could do you could change the angle. You could do all kinds of things in here, and it doesn't scale or change that whole group of objects. It scales each one individually relative to itself. So it's super powerful. So I'm gonna click OK. I might just zoom in and see, like, that looks like that's pretty decent for my circle. I could have gone a little bit less, and then I hid all of my black lines. So I'm just going to go back up to here to object show all. One thing about hiding is you can hide in multiple steps, but then you show everything back at once. So there we are. There's my fixed data shapes. I didn't change the color or the shapes or anything from the original file that I got. I kind of like these colors. I like these shapes. I like that they chose gray for the wild type cell lines, and then they used colors for the other cell lines. And so I didn't change any of that. I often will change colors in figures, but I actually thought these were pretty nice. These are all kind of warm colors, but different cell lines. So I didn't make any changes there. I think that is what I have or what I would do for this figure. So now you can kind of see our before and after, and we can see our data really shows up a lot better in this version. We don't need that legend anymore, provided we have the space to get this large. We have some things that recede to the background. There's a couple, when I was in there, maybe I could enlarge all those shapes even more and transform each. I would never do that. But if it were my data and I knew that wouldn't change the story or the message, I might want to do that. But otherwise, I think this looks pretty good. I think this is definitely an improvement. I think it looks really slick and professional. I think it really highlights the data. And this is, 30 minutes or so of what I would do to kind of really clarify the message of this figure. So anything else to add, Giovanni, or do you want to take a stab at the figure for?
Yeah, I can show you. So we're at 52 actually. So we only got about 8 more minutes. And I don't see. I see another question has come in. So I was kind of thinking we could either go in to switch over to see sort of another perspective on things, or to see what I might have tweaked it, or we could start just diving into questions. I don't know if. See, one other one came in. Is there a way to know exactly what percentage stretched it was? So there isn't actually, not a percentage. You can read what the value. You can sort of undo, check the value, redo, and then check the value, and then sort of. That's how you would calculate the percentage. I have definitely done that. It is not, and that's really if you're going to nerd out on it. I have not done that. And thankfully I haven't had to in a long time, because There is a suite of plugins, and I'll just mention those now. It's called the Astute Graphics plugins, which take care of a lot of that sort of those problems of having to sort of hand curate a lot of those things. We'll kind of put that info, and we'll share that kind of information about that plugin at some point here. But yeah, you kind of have to put in the mathematical work if you want to do that. There is a way that you can kind of reset some of those objects, but not in a way that that you could sort of preserve the shape. So, we're getting a bunch of questions.
Somebody asked, yeah, could you use the percentage stretch from the text? That's what I was thinking, maybe.
Yeah, that is actually a very good question.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I have definitely used that too. If you did stretch the text at the same time, you might not always do that, but that is a good way of like sort of having somebody tag along with you, even just for that instance, just to be able to read that value. If you're showing a second demo figure, could you remove the clipping mask artifacts again? Oh, so this...
we could probably do a whole session about...
Oh, yeah. About cleaning it up.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, let's see. What do you think? Should we just dive into sort of my my aspect of what I might do? I think we might have enough time, maybe. Okay. Did you save out of that thing? I'll open up the exact same file.
I did. Yeah, it's called Share.
Okay,
Episode
cool.
1 Share. Yeah. So on the topic of the clipping masks, while he's opening that up, I just found something that was no fill, no stroke. And that to me says a clipping mask. And then I did select same fill and stroke, which is no fill, no stroke. But we could definitely show that again, especially next week when we kind of talk about sort of pulling larger figures together with a bunch of panels. That will come up again, and we could certainly show that. And then we could also do an entire session just on managing those hidden goblins of clipping.
Yeah, it's the best way to do it. Actually, you don't know what is there until you actually see it. So I'm quite sure
there was one around each like legend element as well. I'm not sure what it was. There must be one around every little shape or something.
Yeah. And I just realized my resolution is quite a bit different than yours. So everything is going to be a little bit more tiny, but let's just roll with this and say that, yeah, once you find one, then you can kind of say all the shapes like that. And then you can kind of go in and then you basically have selected from there. The other way of doing hunting those guys down really is looking into your layers palette. So I got a few of these zoom palettes in my way, but if I go into here, this is really great. I mean, I use the zoom palette or the layers palette constantly, but this little locate object, which is a little our eye spyglass at the bottom of the palette, and to take you directly to that object. And you can kind of see here, if you pull this out, you can kind of see the structure of it. You can identify clipping groups and then clipping masks. That's another way you can kind of go through here. I can see a bunch of clipping masks through here too. So, another thing that I oftentimes will do when working with a figure, the first thing that I might do is actually I'll select the holding thing, and then I'll just say on group, remove clipping mask, and I'll just go through that process about, I'll just hit repeat on that. So, I don't even know where this stuff is because I just always use the hotkeys. I think I told Tammy that I'm useless as far as like, so here we go. Ungrouping and clipping masks is down here. Release. I mean, command shift 7 there for like basically just hit that on repeat and it'll start peeling apart this thing. So, I'll just remove all these. I'm just hitting this repeatedly. It's just breaking apart all of those things and removing all of those kind of clippings. And you can kind of watch that and see if anything kind of fails. And then you can go in there and just remove those. That oftentimes, if you remove the clipping mask, then the clipping group might remain, or that group might remain. And that's just a good way of sort of clearing the palette. But yeah, so I think another thing that sort of when I looked at this, what I was going to mention here, and this is another kind of funny little nuanced or little trick that I kind of came across and used, is that when I took a look at this, I was like, oh, really are all the shapes kind of needed? I don't know if that's the most important thing or if it even really pertains. We don't have a color key, or we don't have a key that we have to match things up for. So what if we just got rid of that? What if they're all just dots? Then they can kind of sit in the background and we can rely on the color. So that's the sort of tack that I was kind of looking at this. And, I would, similarly, I would go in and isolate all the objects that I don't necessarily want to do. I could just hide those away or lock them down. Actually, that's what I just did. I hit Command 2, or if you go into object and you can lock the objects and select these guys too. And I will lock those guys down too. So now I can't select them. I can only select the stuff in between. And then I'll go in here and I'll just grab this data bit. And I'll just say select same. Hopefully it's grabbed all of that. I've grabbed some stuff up below. Be wary of that too, because that'll bite you. But I'm using my lasso tool to deselect anything outside this group. Something is hidden up there. And if I use my object select tool, I just get a bounding box around these objects, which I was expecting, and that's what I want to see. And I'll just lock those down too. So now, if I go in and marquee select this whole section, I am just going to get those data points. And so the little trick that that I do to convert all of these is actually this convert to shape. So I can go in here and decide it's a limited number of shapes. I can't make triangles. I can't make any rectangle, square, ellipses, or circle. So I'm going to select ellipses because I like circles. And I'm going to hit the what? Did you say oh?
Yeah.
Yeah, this looks like a mess. But first, we're just going to go to absolute value instead of relative value. And right now it's set to inches because Tammy was working in inches. So I don't know what this is going to be. We're going to have to go into a really tiny fraction, but let's try.
Sorry.
I usually work in points. Yeah. But let's try that. Let's try 0.125. Yeah. Oh, okay. Not so bad. Okay. So I'm going to accept that. And so now I've just converted them all to circle, but actually it's just an effect. It's an effect applied to the object. So it's not actually functioning. Oh, you know what? I just noticed here too that I didn't isolate out my center bar here.
Oh, the wider bars.
Actual
yeah.
average. Yeah,
Bigger
yeah.
ones.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's the average point, right? So that's so that was a mistake. Let's just ignore that for right now. But I would normally have selected that out and locked it down. So at this point, this is just an effect that's applied to them. But in order for me to sort of properly bake that in, I go to object and expand appearance. And at that point, it expands them all. And now they are all homogeneously replaced. And that's replacing them directly again on that center point, similar to the transform all, or I can just replace all those objects. And I could also at the, in that dialog decide I want them all smaller, or, and then they're going to basically snap all those objects to a perfect circle, perfect square, or a rectangle, or ellipses as my desire.
Yeah. And we could show sometime too, how when it's an appearance, you can toggle it on and off, but when you expanded the appearance, now it's forever that shape. That's something we could show in another session too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, I think we reached the end of the hour.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
I know. I told you. Yeah, I know. But it's okay because basically you'll see us next time. Same hour, I believe, next month. And I think we're going to play by ear and see what people think. If this time is working for you, if I think we're just sort of committing to coming back and do this again and again and have all sorts of discussions and cover all sorts of topics. So again, keep your ear out for how to engage us with us either on Slack or otherwise, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Awesome, guys. Thank
See you
you.
next time.
Bye-bye.